Well, welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Voisin, the host of Inside Personal Growth. I have a very good friend joining me from Eugene, Oregon. His name is Ron Schultz. And Ron and I have known each other so long that his hair has fallen out. But at any rate, this is I'm going to say the 25th anniversary of a book called Open Boundaries that we're going to be talking about today. And this is creating business innovation through complexity. He co-authored this book with Howard Sherman. So a shout out to Howard Sherman as well. The first original.
I will tell you that Howard is still dead.
Okay, is he still dead? Well, we put a shout out to him wherever he is. But the book, a new edition with the revisions, is excellent. This is 25 years. It's actually been 27 years. I think it was 1995. But the reality is that the content of the book is still applicable, as much applicable today as it was 25 years ago, but has been updated. So again, the book is Open Boundaries. Look for it. We'll put a link on Amazon. Ron, I want to tell our listeners a little bit about you. Ron's written and co-authored and edited 25 published books on social innovation, meditation, emergence, science, and entrepreneurship. In 2014, he received the Social Innovation Leadership Award from the World CSR Congress. Among his books are Creating Good Work, the world's leading social entrepreneurs show how to build a healthy economy. That was in 2013. The Complex Buddhist, Doing Good in a Challenging World. Again, same publisher as this one. And Open Boundaries, which that's this book that we're talking about, but the 21st anniversary edition. In addition to his book publishing credentials, Ron has written hundreds of nationally publicized magazine articles and had an extensive career in television and film. Ron has spoken and lectured at the Skoll World Forum and the World CSR Congress, the Social Enterprise World Forum, the Oxford Jam, and numerous Social Enterprise Alliance summits. He did his undergraduate work at the California State University, Northridge, which has recently accepted his archives for his collection. He's also on the board of directors for the Tom and Ethel Bradley Foundation and the Institute for Study of Coherence and Emergence. And as I said, he lives in Eugene, Oregon. He transplanted himself up there a few years back. So, Ron, you and I have known each other so long, but you co-authored this book with Howard, and at this point, it's like 27 years ago. If you would tell the listeners how complexity played a role in innovation 27 years ago, and what has changed relative to our current complex business environments as it relates to this, because this, if anything's happened, our worlds have just sped up even more, and they've become more complex.
Well, what has to be understood is that complexity didn't start 25 years ago, 27 years ago.
No, it started a long time.
Complexity was, since the beginning of time and probably before the beginning of time. It was, this is, as a definition of complexity, very quickly, you and I interact, something emerges out of that interaction that is greater than the sum of our two parts and not wholly contained by either of us. And when we start including more people than us in that interactive process, things get very complex. In fact, those people who are in relationships with another person will discover that a relationship of two can become very complex and very quick. And so the impact on business has always been operating out of this complex environment. What's happened is we haven't focused on it. We haven't recognized it. We've been trapped in old ways of thinking. In this case, we're coming out of a mechanistic universe that wants everything to fall into certain predictable patterns. And the part of that's most interesting about complexity is that that predictability is not possible because things are constantly emerging and constantly changing.
Yeah, the complexity part of it, it seems, and I'm sure it's like you said, complexity has been here since the dawn of time, but it seems in the world in which we live, especially with the amount of technology that we have to deal with and how much we rely on all of this, you and I here making a call, that's a great example of how this world's become even more complex. You state that the process of forming and informing has always played a major role in this book. What is the paradox is by the very nature of complexity that cannot be fully formulated because it is continually emerging. Speak with the listeners about the slippery nature of complexity thinking, because it is very slippery, let's face it. It's pretty hard to put boundaries around it. You say open boundaries. That's why the book is Open Boundaries, because it's tough.
Yeah, well, the use of the word slippery is very interesting and very apt. What we're really looking at too is the notion that because of the emergence, because of our sense of things interacting and emerging all the time, we can't hold on. And that slippery nature is about our grasping, trying to hold on to it. And it's one of the issues that has caused so many problems in and around our world, is our need to grasp and hold on to things and keep them as they are, as opposed to allowing them to emerge, to change. And the same thing is certainly true within our business foundations and institutions. We want them to be solid, and in this case, they're not. They're constantly changing, and so that emerging quality is in fact slippery, because you can't hold on. There is no grasping, and that's an important quality in this whole process, is to understand that within the work that we're doing, if we're trying to hold on to something, it's just going to slip out of our grasp.
We'll speak about that, because uncertainty seems to be the word that's used. As a matter of fact, in business, there's an acronym, and I can't recall it right now. You probably can. And there's 4 letters, and one of them is uncertainty, right? It's like dealing with uncertainty. There seems to be, in this emerging evolution of the times in which we're living today, much more uncertainty. I can remember what seemed to me, and again, this is perception only, that the world was a lot more stable. And again, I think that's biased thinking. I would agree that it's biased thinking, but at the same time, as a human being, and the way we're made up and the way our brain works, and neurologically how we fire, and our amygdala, and how we hold things in this little brain up here, it has a very difficult time wanting to make that change. It fights. It definitely fights moving to this, as you call it, let go. It's like people, I mean, you're the one with all the background and training in Buddhism. And, as I have a quote on my wall over here, the Dalai Lama says, you'll be remembered for how many people you loved, who loved you, and how much you let go, right? I'm paraphrasing. And it's that let go part that I have a feeling that everybody listening to this show has the most difficult time with.
Well, it is. It's hard. Letting go the notion of letting go is hard. So what I've often said, especially when I'm teaching people meditation, is that it's not so much about letting go. It's about holding on. And if we're not holding on to something, we've got nothing to let go of. And it's in that context, I can understand letting go easier. I get there easier, because if I'm not holding on, there's nothing to let go of. And that's the whole practice. That's the whole idea of this, is that within a complex adaptive system, and that's what we're talking about here, are systems that are able to adapt, that in that change process, if we try to hold on to it, all we're doing is killing it and not allowing it to change and emerge as it wants to do. And that the whole notion of these systems, you and I, our complex adaptive systems, The whole notion of this is that it's constantly moving and changing. That whole process of in the Buddhist area, it's called impermanence. In the business area, it's called that damn change. Yet another change operation. But the thing is that it's always changing. Everything that we're doing that is in an adaptive system is changing. And that's why people were so loath to let go of the mechanical universe, that system that is very predictable, that when you build a widget, you build the same widget over and over and over again, and the system doesn't change. And people feel comfortable, think that they feel comfortable with it. But what actually happens is that stops them from really moving into something new and now, which is the root of innovation.
Yeah, and along with that, which is another Buddhist term which is used, it's the acceptance of what is, right? It's like we sometimes have a preconceived notion as we're inventing something, making something, doing something, that we think it should turn out a certain way. And when we resist, we're not accepting what is or what's trying to show up for us, which is the emergence of the development of this product, service, whatever it might be, because we think it's got to happen this particular way. And in your comments on the myths of the closed system, you state that in stark contrast to the Newtonian closed system, open systems are not mechanical, but emergent. I think that's important to note here. Speak with the listeners about open systems and their emergent properties, because that's really what the essence is.
Yeah. Well, we have this illusion that we can close our systems, that especially systems that involve people, and systems that are adaptive. That we think that if we can close them, we can predict them, we can protect them. And what we understand, of course, is that it's kind of why we build fortifications. We think that these fortifications are somehow going to protect us, when in fact they not only they may protect us, but they also lock us in, so we can't go beyond those boundaries, and we get stuck in those places. And in business, we're constantly having to adapt to what the world how the world is showing up. And so we have to view our systems, we have to recognize that our systems are open by their very nature, and that the closed system is the unnatural system. And so if we can recognize that our systems are open, we can be willing to follow that emergent process that will invariably happen, because we can't not do that. Any biological system, any living system is going to interact with something else, and out of that, something new will emerge. And
I always find it fascinating, Ron, how over the years, I've had so many people on this show. We're almost at 1,000. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking of interviews I've had with Ken Wilber, who got involved in actually codifying what he thought these systems were inside of companies as well, right? So, and he used color codes. Red meant that it was a very caustic, all the way down to a colored system, right? And the reason I brought that up is because Frederic Ledoux, who wrote a book, who's over in France, I was talking with somebody about yesterday, and it's really about what we're talking about here, the open boundaries, right? The open boundaries, this emergence, this being able to not think we've got to have a closed system, but innovation is the key. So you state that businesses know they must innovate to survive. And this is true. I don't think you can force innovation. And unfortunately, that's kind of what a lot of these companies have attempted to do. But that innovation are incompatible with the company's principles. You state that businesses know that they must innovate to survive, but that innovation that they are incompatible with the company's principles are often produce confusion rather than growth. Speak with us, if you would, about the principles, models, rules, and behaviors that interfere with true innovation, because
They don't
every
really
company has.
interfere, Greg. I think that's a bit of a misunderstanding around there.
Okay.
That they can interfere if we're not addressing them. Principles, models, rules, and behavior is really how things happen, how things change, and why they don't change. So the notion here is that the principle of an organization are inviolate. We don't change our principles. We go in with a certain way. We want to create the best product, the best products in this market. We want to become the number, so that it becomes what we're trying to attain, what our organization wants to accomplish. And that doesn't change. Those stay pretty much the same. But in order to meet that principle, we create models that are constantly changing. We're trying to model what it takes to accomplish that principle. So we create a model or a representation of that, because it's not, the model is always changing, it's never complete. And in order to make that model happen, we have to have certain rules that govern the behaviors that will build that model, that will create that model. And so what ends up happening is that when our model changes, which it will, it always changes, we also have to go back and change the rules that govern that and the behaviors that were governed by those rules. And so if we don't do that, if we have a new model and our old rules are still in place, we're not getting the behaviors necessary to create that new model and things fail. But so it's a continual process of updating and our rules and our behaviors to meet the new model, to build the new model. And when we refuse to do that, or we don't do that, or we don't recognize that we have to do it, we don't get what we want. And the change that we would like to happen doesn't. But if we do, if we maintain that, what can emerge is often inconceivable as to when we began.
I remember it being referred by Margaret Wheatley as these ecosystems, right, inside of companies. I'm sure you're familiar with Margaret Wheatley's work as well. And she would state things like, you can't have that innovation, again, like you guys are saying, unless you have this opportunity for people to create. In other words, creating a culture that is consistent with that. Now, we know many companies have done a very amazing job, Apple being one, to allow this to happen. Patagonia, let my people surf, all of those things. You want to comment about creating the ecosystems that are necessary for innovation?
The ecosystems exist. What we have to do is just recognize that we are part of that ecosystem. We are part of a great, we keep thinking that we're somehow separate from our ecosystem. That's probably part of our problems in terms of addressing that, because we are very much a part of all those different processes. And to define one, to define the environment of a business as a separate ecosystem, oftentimes immediately sets it up for a form of failure. We have to recognize that what we're doing is really connected to an entire ecosystem of our universe, and that each process of this that we're involved in, there's an emergent process that builds it and builds it and builds it, so that it is all part of one system. But at the same time, that system is interactive, and that when we try to define it by an ecosystem here or an ecosystem there, what happens is we start closing down those what we call open boundaries. Now, it's there is a thing called self-organization, which has been very big in this process, and people have misunderstood. Eliot, what's his name? The physicist, Elia.
Okay.
At any rate, the fellow who defined this notion of self-organization, Prigogine, there he is. Ilya Prigogine, who's a Nobel physicist. what he said is that there is this self-organization, but it requires boundaries. It doesn't just happen in and of itself. It needs to be bound. It needs to have that area around it. And this is the whole notion of what open boundaries is. It provides that container that will allow for self-organization to take place so that new things can emerge. But at the same time, it has that permeable quality that allows it to open up into the world at large.
Agreed. I think it's, I don't know if this is the right term, but I'll use it. It's having trust that the system will actually self-emerge, self-evolve, right?
You can absolutely have trust in that, because it's, as we say, it's one of the few things that is guaranteed about business is that it's going to change.
Yeah, it is true. And I think it's around the resistance of understanding about how this works, right? That really is the thing that, cogs up. It creates a lot of messes. So, you mentioned in the book that if Einstein was still living, that he had the inclination to capitalize on his theories and discoveries, that he'd be the CEO of the largest company on the face of the earth. I thought that was a great statement, and I would agree. But he didn't commercialize all those things that he thought about, and many people since have commercialized what he thought about and made lots of money off of it. Him and Tesla and a bunch of others. What is business, and how can it thrive and embrace new ways of thinking?
Well, as we know, it needs to embrace new ways of thinking in order to survive. And business is a complex set of interactions to produce something that is there's something that you want to produce. There's something that you want to accomplish, and business is about the process of doing that for profit. And it can be for non-for-profit as well. And those organizations are also equally as complex. But it is an organization process. And the notion of being able to maintain and evolve to a new way of thinking is merely being open to the process of that emergent process of things changing, of things interacting and new things coming out of it. Because the whole notion of that is that it's what can emerge out of an interaction is both new and now, which is what innovation is about. But it's also important to understand that complexity is agnostic. Good things can emerge, bad things can emerge, neutral things can emerge. It's that interaction is not necessarily going to produce a positive emergence. So we have to have some discretion and some way of looking at things, of discerning what is good and what isn't good. And that's what characterizes the business that stays in business from a business that goes out of business, is that ability to discern what works and what doesn't. But it's also being open to that new way, because we can find that path. It's like creating new neural networks.
Well, it is, because, we have to adapt and adopt. We have to cope. Complexity thrown at me, or uncertainty thrown at me, or whatever it might be, it starts with the individual inside these organizations to be able to understand how to work with it, how to be a partner with it.
Yeah, we try to sanitize out the uncertainty,
right?
And that's a real mistake. Because we're uncomfortable with that uncertainty, with not knowing. And that's when we want things to be predictable. And
part of that, Ron, is the system you were talking about, the systems inside the principles inside the company, the beliefs inside the company. If you have a top line manager, let's just talk about that, and I work under him or her or whatever, and they are pushing me to get something done, I don't have the time maybe to wallow which actually, if I could wallow, right, I'd probably make a better decision. They're literally looking for decisions to be made because they believe that it's driving profit. The longer it takes to innovate something, the more money it costs us. The list is a mile long, right? And it does require that everybody in the company understand these principles more clearly.
Those rules of behavior and the relationship of those.
Yeah.
But what we also need to understand is that complexity, and this is the place where we fall down a lot, complexity can't be managed.
Right.
Because of its predictive nature, it can't really be managed. It can be led. And so that's why leaders have to recognize the complex nature of their organization and lead them and not just try to manage them. Because managing them is a continual system of closing the system so we can get a better handle on it, right? That's what management is about. And this is not, and the paradox is the harder you hold on, the quicker it slips away.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And in that, I want to talk about chaos for a second. You provided a definition according to Mike McMaster in the book. Can you speak with us about the difference between chaos and complexity as it relates to innovation in business? Because,
absolutely. And I think the best way to do that, Greg, is to use what we call a phase transition, which is actually very simple. So if we think of a block of ice as being a solid, and as the sun beats on that block of ice, it goes through a phase transition and melts and turns into a puddle of water. And that puddle of water is the complexity out of which things can emerge, because that puddle of water can mix and it can, other places within that water can find new avenues and new interactions and new places to happen. And then what happens in that system? It goes through another phase transition where it evaporates and it turns into a gas and it evaporates up into the universe. And that's where chaos is. That dissipation of the water into that gas form becomes chaotic. And what you end up having is you have these little islands floating about. And so that there's no real coherence within them. And so the complexity, the watery area that is in that phase transition is really where we have the greatest ability to affect change, because it is bounded. There is a membrane around that puddle that allows it to interact with other parts within that. And this whole process oftentimes gets that's too chaotic, when in fact what we're saying is the whole notion of the complexity scares us too much, and we don't even want to get to it. So we kind of extend it out beyond the boundaries of what is really complexity into this area of little pockets that can't be understood.
Yeah, and again, is as simple as this might be to understand, it's difficult for our brains and us to actually implement. It's a lot easier to talk about than it is to really implement it on a regular basis, especially in a working company with hundreds of employees who are all interacting with one another and have to deal with this. And if you would define these adjacent possibilities. You state in the book that the businesses that succeed are those that are first within an industry to see an adjacent possibility and to act upon it. Okay. And you and I have talked about adjacent possibilities before. And I hear the term being used. I'm not certain there's a clear definition for the listeners. So I'd love to give them a clear definition, and then how you think adjacent opportunities come about for somebody to capitalize on.
Well, adjacent opportunities are adjacent possibilities, also what I call adjacent opportunities, are those possibilities that are one step away from where we are right now. They surround us. Every time we make a choice, every time we make a decision, something new emerges. And out of that emergence, there's also emerges a new set of these adjacent possibilities. And what it is about from a human perspective is recognizing what they could be, what they are. They're right there, and it's a matter of seeing them. Again, they're agnostic, so some of those possibilities suck, and they are not going to deliver what we want. Others of those possibilities are going to be the next step in the whole innovative process of our business. And so it's a matter of really being open to those and being aware of what they might be and what they could be. And as I said, an adjacency is the closest we can have to where we are right now. So it's just one step away from where we are, but we're surrounded by those adjacent possibilities. And the second part of your question is, how do you act upon it? It's about first of all, it's about recognizing, about being able to see it, and about seeing it that it is something that makes sense for the organization, and that is part of that falls under the principles of the organization, because it's within that system of principles, models, rules, and behavior that we can make that change to that new adjacent possibility. But without recognizing its relationship, you could pick a possibility that isn't appropriate for the organization and just go down a rat hole into something that really can pull the whole company down.
Well, I think Rita McGrath, I had her on here, and one of the things that she speaks about is seeing around corners. Those adjacent possibilities, opportunities, as you might say, are a result of being aware. And you're actually aware, and you're looking for ways to kind of almost, I don't want to say this, but I'm just going to say it, predict what's going to happen, right? In other words, to have this little crystal ball and say, okay, look, we take data in from all kinds of places. We assimilate this data and we rely on data. Many of us are making decisions based on a lot of data that's being fed to us, whether it's through the internet, whether it's through our employees, whether it's through other vendors. It's people on the outside we hear from, and we hear things and then we go, an opportunity. This is something that I could seize. And I love the fact that if you are aware, you can almost find an adjacent opportunity somewhere frequently. I mean, there's all kinds of examples of people finding them.
Let me define a little different, so that the environment gives us cues as to what is about to emerge. We don't see it exactly. We don't know precisely what's going to happen, but there are cues within the environment that says this is about to happen. And it's those people who can recognize those cues who are the ones who can open up to those adjacent opportunities, possibilities. It is to a certain degree intuitive. It takes a level of ability to be open to what's around you. And if you're used to looking at this kind of narrow world, this narrow focus that is as a way of kind of filtering out all this stuff and all that, we can miss the cues. And what we often talk about is, how do you create cue spotters within an organization who can see what's happening? The Marines had a great example of this. They called them creative contributors. And because when they went to smaller units, each unit needed to have this creative contributor who could kind of stick his head up, metaphorically, stick his head up above the hole and kind of sniff the air and get a sense of what was going on around them.
Right.
And because of that very nature of exposing themselves in that fashion, they're easily killed, as the Marines would tell you. And so that they become somebody that needs to be protected within the organization. And so that they're the ones who have that ability to see, almost, not necessarily predict, but at least be able to read the cues.
Yeah, I'd agree.
And be able to bring that back as a means of to operate the organization more effectively.
And I always like to use example. I happen to hear this story about a woman in a company back east, made in America, and some of the great examples of how people are innovative in that space. And one is that she decided to make customized books. So we know that the world today, the way it's evolved, you can order a book off Amazon and literally it's almost produced the same day and it comes out. So she gets these presses and she customized books for people any time of the year, for birthday, holiday, with Ron's picture in it, with a picture of his dog, with whatever, produces this book, and last year produced 500,000 books that were customized that people order off the internet, right? And because people love customized things. They like things that they can hand to Ron and say, hey, Ron, here's the picture of your family, and I put it in this book. And they built the story too, and the cartoons around it, right? In other words, the whole character thing. And it's fascinating how somebody is quickly able to take an opportunity and push those books out literally within days to people who are putting them up, the pictures up on the net, using the net to get them, organize them, put it into a book, print it in color, send it back out, use it for Christmas, a holiday, a birthday, a bar mitzvah, whatever it might be, but literally has made a very, very successful business. And I love stories like that because it's just fascinating how somebody sees an opportunity, an adjacent opportunity, and seizes it, right? They didn't go, oh, well, Simon and Schuster has to make all those books because they're the ones that do it. No, I can make those books on my own. Those presses are cheap now. I can either rent one, I can buy one, I can do whatever. It's just great. It's great to see.
Well, it's having that courage, if you will, to act on it. Because what happens is there's always this plethora of new opportunities that are coming at us, and the notion is to see it. What happens with a company like that is that they're able to pick up the cues and move toward that, as opposed to having to look behind them to try and find what has emerged.
Right.
So
right.
It is, and that's the real key. Is that how do we train our workforce to be able to see what's coming toward them, rather than having to look behind? Because as soon as you look back, somebody has a competitive edge on you.
Yeah. Well, if we use what you call Champy's language, businesses are made of ideas expressed as words, then the critical barrier to innovation is stuckness, you said, and inadequate ideas and formulations. What are some of the questions that we could ask to determine if our ideas are viable and discard the ones that are no longer useful? And this is very appropriate this time because we were just talking about it. Right? And you give a list of questions in the book.
Yeah, we have they're really investigations, allowing people to to really look at what their organization, the different pieces. And the answer to that question, Greg, is really in the question that the ones that are no longer useful. How do we recognize what's no longer useful and what's getting in the way of our process? Now, what happens, I'll give you an example that everyone has. You go into your refrigerator, and there are invariably, well, at least in our refrigerator, there are invariably things in the back of the refrigerator that have been forgotten, that haven't been cleared out. And after a while, they begin to stink. And you recognize that this process is there. And so the notion is, those things are no longer useful, and they're causing an impediment within the system itself, and it's causing an impediment out in the room with the smell. So you get rid of those things, and those are pretty obvious things that have to go. But we have to really look at: is this something that is useful? Is this something that is producing that is adding to our model, that is helping us adequately produce what we're trying to accomplish? And if it's not, then we have to let go of it. And again, it's part of that process of trying to figure out what to hold on to and what not to hold on to. It's really a discriminating awareness and understanding that discernment of what it is that is working, what it is that isn't. And being
and that is true. I mean, and when you ask that question of any business,
Right.
What you're trying to see is kind of, I'm going to call it the delta between, okay, I do these things, this doesn't work. How come you haven't let go of what's not working? You're still doing it. It's the old shit still sitting in the back of the refrigerator, right?
Right.
Well,
another thing that you and I work, I've worked in the nonprofit sector a lot.
yeah.
And in the nonprofit sector, there's an awful expression about trying to get something done. Sometimes you have to kill the puppy.
Mhm.
And the issue is nobody wants to kill the puppy. But the thing is that it does. There are times when that doesn't work. Now it's going to upset all the people from PETA. But the notion is that sometimes that's not. It's time, and that's metaphoric, please.
Right.
That sometimes it's we have to get rid of what we are clinging hardest to. We really want this. This is such a good idea. It's got to work. And we try it and we try it, and we run it into the ground. And so we have to recognize when is something not working. Be willing to have that discernment to recognize when something is not working, and also understand that we're surrounded by other possibilities.
Yeah. It kind of closes. You get pretty myopic when a lot of that stuff gets stuck in the back of the refrigerator. And once you clear it out, and you have the willingness to clear it out, you realize you've made room for either more, or you've made room to see what you have better and say, hey, these are the things that I use. Why did I buy that other stuff? I didn't really need it anyway, right? So that's a great example.
Well, innovation is also a notion of not only what is missing, but what can we put in that place of something that's missing?
Yeah.
So that it's not necessarily that there's a part missing, but something new might go into that place.
Well, let's wrap our interview up with this question. The book has got a lot of great stories in it. It's an opportunity for people, and we'll put a link to Amazon to this.
Yeah. Also put a link into emergentpublications.com, because
we'll put a link to them as well. We'll do both. So go out and get a copy of Open Boundaries. It's going to give you an opportunity to have some insights, to open your mind about new possibilities, about new ways of thinking. But Ron, all the stories, the ideas, the wisdom about complexity, what are 3 takeaways that you would like to leave our listeners with that would help them thrive in a world of complexity? What 3 takeaways from this? We've been almost on for 50 minutes now. What would you like to tell the listeners?
Well, first of all, things change. You're going to have to be willing to be open to that change process and understand that any kind of adaptive system that you're involved in is going to change. And if you do that, then it's crucial to be able to look at your models, rules, and behaviors and understand that they are in constant relationship to each other. And that when the model changes, which is what you're trying to produce according to your own principles of the organization, when your model changes, you also have to change the rules that govern the behaviors that are put in place to create them. And if you don't, that's the greatest downfall. And that's one of the most important aspects of this process. Because what we were talking about in terms of a formulation and inform, what happens when we formulate our ideas and we solidify them, we lock into that solidification all the potential and all the limitations of that process. And if we formulate and solidify it too much, those limitations can overtake the possibilities, and then we arrive dead on arrival. So it's really important to be able to open to the processes that are around us, to be open and to change our because our models are constantly changing, be willing to change the rules that we govern our behaviors, and so that we can get what we want. And if we can do that, we can do that.
Well, I think, again, it's exposure for my listeners to find alternative ways of approaching, whether it's a problem or it's an opportunity to look at open boundaries as a way to creating business innovation through this complexity that they're probably dealing with. And the book does a
Undoubtedly.
very good job, huh?
Undoubtedly dealing with.
Yeah, undoubtedly everybody is. And but the book gives this a great opportunity for people to look at systems, the way they might be thinking, stories that other people have. So Ron, thanks for being on Inside Personal Growth. Thanks for spending this time with us. Here's the book. We'll put a link. We'll have a link to Emergent Publications as well. We'll have one to Amazon. And namaste to you. Thanks for being on. Thanks for taking the time. Appreciate
My
it.
pleasure. My pleasure.